Are you a maker? Do you have a loved one with an upcoming birthday? Are you short on time and money but have plenty of hobby electronics laying around? Here's a quick gift idea that saved my ass, and hopefully will save yours. This tutorial was created with Raspbian Light in mind, meaning no X or other windowing systems are used. Due to the simple nature of this project, we'll be relying on the frame buffer for displaying our graphics instead of X. Basically, this is a simple digital photo frame project. With the exception of one item, all the component elements of this project were things I already had on hand. Those materials that I had on hand were an old Raspberry Pi 2, which had been sitting in a drawer since it was replaced by the Pi 3, a micro SD card, a 5-inch HDMI TFT display which I'd purchased for some long forgotten reason, a little bit of 22 gauge stranded wire. Chose that over the solid core so it gave me more flexibility for when I had to fit the thing into a case. A micro USB female breakout board, which I always find a use for. A 5-volt 2-amp power supply I had laying around. And there was only one component I did need to buy, which was a 4x6-inch box frame style picture frame, which, thanks to Amazon, arrived in only a couple of days. Had the time crunch been greater than that, I'm sure I would have found something at Michael's, Hobby Lobby, or another local craft-type brick-and-mortar store. This is the part of the project you may actually end up wanting to take the most liberties with, as it's going to vary depending upon what you have on hand and what your case design skills and time constraints are like at the time of your assembly of this project. I find the particular 5-inch HDMI TFT display I ended up using for this project fairly useful due to its small form factor, and is also why my Pi 2 was used instead of something smaller like the Raspberry Pi Zero. As you can see, the form factor really has the Raspberry Pi models with the full HDMI connectors in mind as the placement of the GPIO pins that the screen fits onto, and the HDMI connector would make use of the Pi Zero awkward. This is a rare case where use of the Raspberry Pi Zero might actually have been more bulky to use, as unless I'd put together my own custom HDMI jumper or PCB like the one that came with the display, the bulk of a mini HDMI adapter and even the shortest HDMI cable I had on hand would have been more than I was looking to deal with. Reduction of bulkiness was actually why I chose to solder power connections onto the Pi instead of using its micro USB port, as this allowed me to simply run power cables through two small holes I put on the back of the picture frame. The wires were soldered onto the appropriate test pads on the back of the Raspberry Pi 2. In that case, that means ground was soldered onto PP5 and positive was soldered onto PP2 as shown. As I said earlier, I poked a couple of holes through the cardboard backing of the picture frame and fed each wire through. Once threaded, I soldered them to the appropriate points on the micro USB breakout board. This way I can still use an unmodified micro USB power supply. One of the nice things about a project like this is the simplicity involved when it comes to the software. Basically, all the functionality comes from use of the cron tab and a simple bash script. The cron tab just fires up the script, which starts up the picture slideshow. The involvement of the frame buffer means we'll need root privileges, so be sure to add the command that you're about to see on the screen here to the cron tab for the root user. And now you'll see on screen the contents of the script itself. I found this essentially online. If you Google around, you may find a better combination of options that work best with the frame buffer imager, otherwise known as FBI. You will need to install that. I do not believe it comes by default on Raspbian Light. You'll notice a sleep command before the frame buffer imager command is run. That is present to give the Pi a little bit of time to complete its booting process. That way you don't have the slideshow getting interrupted by text being displayed by the command line as the Pi begins to boot. If for your picture frame project you decide to use something other than an HDMI-based display, Just keep in mind you'll most likely be using a different frame buffer. Since I'm using the default frame buffer, that's why the device shown is FB0. I believe if you're going to use a TFT display that does not use the HDMI port, your frame buffer is going to look a little bit different in the command. That is pretty much it. The information on how to configure the specific HDMI display I used will be covered in another video, which will be linked at the end of this one. Really, the purpose of this video is just to help you get started should you want to implement a picture frame gift with a different set of parts you have laying around. The code shown in the video will be linked in the description, and thanks for watching.